Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we are in 1 Peter, and 1 Peter is an epistle written to suffering Christians, Christians who were suffering for their faith. And so it's a great resource for those who are going through difficulties, trials, sufferings, especially if those trials and sufferings are connected to a person's faith. And Peter gives some very good practical advice on how to respond to these difficult situations. But in chapter 1, Peter really lays it on the line, because he really begins to focus upon the holiness of the Christian. And really, before he gets deep into sufferings and how to deal with sufferings, he really nails home this idea of living a holy life. In chapter 1, in verse 15, it says, "But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." And that was a word spoken by God in the book of Leviticus, where God said, you are my people. You need to be holy because I am holy. And you are called after my name, basically, is what he's saying. And so some might think that this is a bit peculiar, that he's writing to these Christians who are suffering for the faith, and he starts off by focusing on holiness. Usually what we would do with a person who is suffering for their faith would kind of to pity them, or to kind of just say, well, everything's going to be okay. Maybe gloss over some shortcomings that they're having because, they're going through a hard time. But Peter doesn't do that. He doesn't make any excuse for sin or anything that's unholy in the Christian's life just because they are suffering. And I find that very interesting, because it's so easy for us to justify the sins in our life, especially when we can make an excuse based upon some suffering that we feel that we are having. And so we might say, well, it's okay that I spoke harshly to my wife, to my spouse, because the dog bit me on my way in. It's okay if I went out, and partied last weekend, because my job's been kind of tough, and I just needed a weekend to kind of just unwind. And we start making excuses for living an unholy life based upon the fact that we're dealing with some hardships and some trials. The people that Peter was writing to very likely could have been suffering to the point to where their own lives were threatened, and to where they were actually enduring physical, they're going through physical pain and suffering because of the faith that they had. And Peter doesn't say, well, you know what, you guys, we give you the okay because, you're suffering a lot, so it's okay if you mess up here and there and you do this or that. No, he doesn't. He says you need to be holy, and he ties them back to Leviticus, which, if you remember from our devotions way back then, the book of Leviticus is pretty much a whole book on holiness and how the Israelites were a holy people because they were God's people. And nothing demonstrated that more than the Levitical priests. And that's who is mostly focused on in the book of Leviticus. And at least 3 times God makes this statement, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And just for no other reason than the fact that we call ourselves by God's name, the fact that we owe allegiance to God, and that we proclaim to be his people, we ought to live a holy life no matter what our circumstances are, no matter what we're going through. Now, that might sound like an insensitive word, and I no way want to be insensitive to people who are suffering and going through hardship, and we need to offer grace and things towards others who are suffering. But when we ourselves are suffering, we need to understand that doesn't give us an excuse not to live the life that God has given or called us to live. And so He'd tell them, you know, some reasons to be holy: because God is holy, because you were bought with the precious blood of Christ, redeemed by the precious blood of the Lamb. In other words, you are expensive. You cost God a lot to become His people. And so He should expect you to live a certain way. We are His special people. That carries into chapter 2 and verse 9, where He talks about us being a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession. God has separated us and made us His own special people. And so we ought to live in accordance to that calling that we have. We need to live a holy life for the sake of unbelievers. You can look at chapter 2 and verse 12, where He says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So by living a holy life, a godly life, it can actually help you in the day of persecution and trial. Because when people try to attack you and try to come and bring accusations against you, when they see what a good life you're living, and the holy life that you're living, they'll almost be ashamed to bring up anything against you. And so we need to live a holy life for that. And how do we live a holy life? Well, we have to have the right mind. Chapter 1 and verse 13, prepare your mind for action, or gird up the loins of your mind. We have to live a life of obedience. Chapter 1 in verse 14, where He talks about, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. And he goes on. We have to live a life with the right attitude. Chapter 1 and verse 17. And if you call on Him as Father, who judges impartiality according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. And that word is phobia. It means to live afraid of the fact that God is not a person to be messed with. And so we should live a holy life for that. We can be holy by putting off sin, of course. Chapter 2 and verse 1. By getting into God's Word. Chapter 2 and verse 2, where it talks about longing for the pure milk of the Word, the pure spiritual milk of the Word. By not getting too involved in the flesh. Chapter 2 and verse 11. And so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things in here that can teach you how to be holy. And the main thing is to impress upon your mind and my mind the necessity of being holy. And so these are some things to think about. Hopefully they're helpful to you. I do thank you guys for listening in today. Hope you guys have a great day today. God bless.